Air India Express Flight 812 is on its final approach to runway 24 at Mangalore Airport. The plane is unstable. It's flying in at a dangerous 9-degree angle and with excessive speed. At the end of the runway is a 200-foot cliff. The runway is short and there is no margin for error. But at this speed, they won't be able to stop and they might fall into the cliff.
Go around, Captain. Please go around.
But the captain doesn't respond. The clock is ticking. They need to go around now, but they don't. The plane continues hurtling towards the runway. What happens next? Let's find out. This is the story of Air India Express 812.
Wings.
It's 10 p.m. at Dubai International Airport. Air India Express Flight 812 is being prepared for its next flight. Passengers are boarding, luggage is being loaded, the plane is being refueled. In the cockpit, the captain and the first officer settle into their seats. It's supposed to be a simple 3-hour hop to Mangalore. The captain has flown into this airport 16 times before, and the first officer has done this 66 times. But tonight, something feels off. The captain stifles a yawn, signals to the stewardess.
Can I get a coffee, please?
He is just back from a 2-week break in Serbia, only returning 2 days ago. And his body clock is completely out of sync. The time zones are still messing with his sleep. And he wasn't even supposed to be flying tonight. It was a last-minute change. Air India Express had called him the previous day and had asked him to switch for a colleague.
Okay, I'll do it.
In 2010, Air India Express handled scheduling manually, with pen and paper. And these last-minute changes were part of the routine. But these last-minute changes took a toll on the pilots. Sometimes they were fatigued, and their judgment was blurred. This story begins on the night of May 21st, 2010 at Mangalore International Airport. Here's the plan for tonight. Take off from Mangalore at 9:35 p.m, land in Dubai at 1 a.m, take off from Dubai again at 2:45 a.m, and return to Mangalore by 6:30 a.m. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. A flight so routine you could do it with your eyes closed. The captain is Zlatko Glušića, a 55-year-old Serbian national. He is one of a handful of foreign pilots rostered by Air India Express. Next to him in the cockpit is 40-year-old Mumbaikar Harbinder Ahluwalia. In the back with the passengers were 4 other cabin crew members, but they won't play a part in the story today. The aircraft is a Boeing 737-800, equipped with a short-field performance package, allowing it to operate from airports with short runways, like the one here at Mangalore. The plane is just under 3 years old and it was delivered to Air India Express in January of 2008. Tonight's flights are going to happen late in the night, and most of it will occur in the window of circadian low, the hours between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. where fatigue peaks and concentration dips. Air India Express typically conducts pre-flight medical checks for all pilots as required by DGCA, the Indian Aviation Authorities. However, there is a problem at Mangalore tonight. Air India Express does not have a medical officer on staff or on contract at Mangalore Airport, meaning no pre-flight medical exams are conducted for flights departing from Mangalore. While DGCA rules mandate medical checks for flight crews, the specific requirements are ambiguous and they are often interpreted differently by airlines. In this case, the pilots are asked to just self-certify their fitness to fly and no actual medical tests are performed. The plane then departs Mangalore on time and the outbound flight to Dubai proceeds uneventfully. Upon landing in Dubai, the crew spends about 1 hour and 22 minutes preparing for the return flight. Because this is a quick turnaround flight, there are no requirements for a pre-flight medical check in Dubai. The assumption is that the pilots have already been cleared at Mangalore. But today, that assumption is dangerously flawed. And now, as they prepare to take off for the return leg, the question looms. Are they truly fit to fly? The plane is now ready for takeoff on the runway in Dubai. The throttle is pushed forward, the engines roar to life, and the plane lifts off into the night. It is headed for Mangalore. On short flights like this, relief crews are usually not needed. the same 2 pilots will fly the plane for the entire 3.5-hour journey. But about an hour into this flight, fatigue begins to set in for the captain. The time zone in Serbia, where he had been holidaying, is GMT +2, meaning his body clock is 3.5 hours behind. Combined with the disruption to his sleep cycle from constant travel, the captain starts feeling the effects. He leans back in his seat and closes his eyes. And within moments, he drifts off into a deep sleep. And the sound of snoring fills the cockpit. Now, there's just one functioning pilot left. First Officer Ahluwalia is left to handle both ATC communications and flying the plane single-handedly. A job that's meant for 2, now being done by 1. But if there is any airport where every ounce of focus, precision and teamwork is crucial, it's Mangalore. Here's why. Mangalore Airport is non-standard in many ways. First, it sits on top of a small hill and it has what's called a tabletop runway. A runway that is surrounded by steep cliffs on all sides. The runway is also narrower. It is just 150 meters wide as opposed to the standard 300 meters. Adding to the challenge, the runway end safety area isn't well maintained and has overgrown with plants. And to make things worse, the end of runway 24 plunges into a 250-foot drop. An aircraft overshooting here doesn't just risk a runway overrun, but it faces the terrifying possibility of a catastrophic fall off the edge of a cliff. And as if that wasn't enough, the Mangalore area control radar isn't working. Normally, the area controller would provide descent clearance before handing the aircraft off to the approach controller. But without it, things are about to get messy. Given Mangalore's complexity, Air India Express had classified the airport as a critical airport, meaning only the captain can land here, while the first officer is limited to pilot monitoring. This too will play a part in the story. With a difficult approach, a cliffside runway, and radar down, Mangalore demands a flight crew that is on top of their game, working together. But in the cockpit of Flight 812, the first officer is performing double duty and the captain is fast asleep. It's now 5:33 in the morning. The aircraft is at the waypoint Igama. ATC instructs the crew to prepare for an ILS DME arc approach into runway 24. Alright, so what's a DME arc approach? During a standard ILS approach, an aircraft aligns with the runway centerline and descends along the glide slope in a straight line towards the runway. However, when obstacles like hills, mountains, or restricted airspaces are present near the airport, a straight-in approach might not be possible. In these cases, the aircraft may follow a circular DME approach at a fixed distance from the airport. The aircraft follows this arc until it can safely intercept the localizer to align with the runway. This method ensures the aircraft avoids hazards while still guiding it towards a safe landing. Here in Mangalore, the Kudremukh Hills are just to the east of Mangalore Airport, and in order to avoid it, an arc approach is necessary for runway 24. The DME arc approach demands more concentration and skill from the pilot. It's not inherently difficult. Pilots are trained and they regularly perform these procedures, but it requires careful attention to detail. This is a good time for me to remind you that the captain is still sleeping and the first officer is doing double duty. Approximately 130 miles from Mangalore, the first officer requests descent clearance. This is where the plane would normally start descending from. But today, ATC denies this request. Remember that the Mangalore area control radar is not working. Without radar, ATC resorts to a manual system called Standard Procedure Control. They form a mental map of where the planes are, and to ensure safety, they keep the planes separated further apart than usual, normally 10 to 15 minutes of flying time, to make extra sure that they stay safe. When a plane needs to change altitude, ATC has to make sure that there is enough space both at the new altitude and at all altitudes that they will cross while descending. Because of this, They prefer to keep planes at the same altitude for as long as possible. For this approach, the ATC decided that the right time for the plane to start descending is when they are 80 miles away. The plane now reaches the 80 miles mark and they are cleared for the descent. The first officer taps the controls, initiating the descent to 7,000 feet. The flight crew is trained to descend from such short distances. They know the plan. If they remain too high, they must enter a holding pattern to lose altitude. But the planning for this is done during an approach briefing. And this approach briefing, according to Air India Express, needs to be done at 150 miles from the airport. But with the captain deeply asleep, the briefing window is missed. The first officer glances over, sees the captain slumped in his seat, and gently nudges him awake. His voice cuts through the quiet cockpit.
Captain, we are approaching.
The captain wakes up, slowly, groggy, and disoriented. Remember, only the captain is allowed to land at Mangalore. The descent has already begun, and there is no time to go through a full briefing. So they decide to skip the approach briefing. The captain then takes his first of many actions today. He initiates the speed brakes, trying to lose speed and quicken the descent as the runway draws nearer. The plane is now 25 miles away and at 18,000 feet. Since they began their descent later than usual, they are much higher than where they should be at this stage. ATC clears them down to 2,900 feet. The first officer requests a shorter approach, asking to proceed directly to the 338 radial and join the 10 DME arc. The ATC approves it. But given that they are already much higher than their ideal descent path, it's puzzling why the first officer would want a shorter route, since a longer distance could have allowed them to descend more smoothly. By now, the pilots have been on duty for nearly 10 hours, pushing through the window of circadian low. Throughout this phase, Captain Glusika remains mostly silent, occasionally yawning or exhaling. But worryingly, the first officer starts yawning too. Fatigue is setting in on both sides of the cockpit. They are ready to land, go home, and get some well-deserved rest. The plane reaches the entry point to the 10 DME arc. At this point, they should have been at 2,900 feet. But they are at 10,500 feet. They start following the circular path. By the time they arrive at this position, ready to make the right turn, they should be at 2,200 feet. But they are not able to. They arrive at this place at an extreme altitude of 6,000 feet. The captain scans his instruments, realizes that they are way too high. To lose speed and altitude, he lowers the landing gear and deploys the speed brakes to the full setting. But despite his efforts, the plane continues to remain too high. And at this height, they won't be able to capture the glide slope at all. The glide slope will be under them. Yet, strangely, just 2 minutes later, the glide slope turns pink and the plane latches on to the localizer and begins descending towards the runway. But wait, how did that happen? What has happened is that they have captured the phantom 9-degree glide slope instead of the correct 3-degree glide slope. And this has caused the plane to start descending at a terrifying 9-degree angle, almost 3 times the normal. For an alert pilot, the steep angle should have been a clear sign that they were on the wrong path. But this crew completely misses the clues. For a more detailed explanation of the 9-degree glide slope, please watch the story of Pakistan Airways 8303. The steep angle of approach is causing the plane to speed up. At 10 miles from the runway, the captain instructs the first officer,
Give me flaps 10.
in an attempt to reduce speed, but they are flying way too fast for flaps 10. The first officer hesitates, and he questions the captain.
Are you sure? Flaps 10?
Captain says yes, and the first officer sets flaps 10. At 7.5 miles, the plane should be at 2,000 feet, but they are at 5,000 feet. At 4 miles, they should be at 1,500 feet, but they are at 3,200 feet, more than twice the altitude that they should be at. The plane continues to descend at a crazy rate. At this point, The crew should have recognized that they are too high and they should have initiated a holding pattern to reduce altitude. This would have been a part of the approach checklist which they failed to perform. 3 miles from the airport, flaps 40 is selected, and before landing checklist is completed. They should have been at 1200 feet, but they are at 2800 feet. The plane's descent rate has increased from 1000 feet per minute to 2000 feet per minute. The first officer identifies that they are not stabilized.
We're too high, Captain. Runway is straight down.
But they continue with the approach.
Pull up. Pull up.
2 miles from the airport, the captain disconnects the autopilot and takes manual control. At this point, they should have gone around. The approach is entirely unstable. And with the speed at which they are approaching, they run the risk of not being able to stop the plane in time, given how short the runway is. 1.5 miles away. It's only now that the captain has realized that they have captured the 9-degree glide slope and not the 3-degree glide slope.
Wrong localizer. Glide path.
The cockpit fills with warnings. Sink rate, pull up, repeated over and over. The captain ignores them.
Oh my god.
But still, he pushes forward, fixated on landing. A worried first officer suggests once again,
Captain, go around. We are unstable.
but no. The captain disagrees and overrides the first officer, and the first officer doesn't take control because he is not allowed to land in Mangalore. 1 mile away. The runway is in sight now. They are still too high, too fast. The captain leans into the descent, pushing the column forward. The plane dives, now dropping at a harrowing 4,000 feet per minute, incredibly close to the ground. Alarms fill the cockpit. The ground proximity warning system is screaming. Automated calls one after the other. Last-ditch pleas to act. But neither pilot acknowledges them. They press forward, not properly aligned with the ILS path. The captain is stuck in a psychological trap known as plan continuation bias. The urge to stick to a plan even when everything screams otherwise. Despite every signal, he's committed, locked into the landing. The runway lights grow larger. In the tower, ATC radios in, sensing that something is wrong.
Express 812. Can you confirm established?
Instead of reporting accurately, the captain instructs the first officer to respond with affirmative. With the confirmation, the tower grants clearance and advises,
Express 812. Clear to land. Winds calm.
even as they are given landing clearance, the plane is still descending at 4,000 feet per minute. They are at 700 feet as opposed to the standard 300 feet where they should be at. Alarms continue ringing in the cockpit. The plane crosses the runway threshold at 200 feet at a blistering 160 knots, well above the target speed of 144 knots. The plane floats past the touchdown zone, burning up precious distance on the short tabletop runway. The first officer makes a final desperate plea,
Go around, Captain. We don't have runway left.
but the captain doesn't pull up. First contact. The right wheel hits the runway, 4,500 feet from the start. The plane bounces, then settles again at 5,200 feet. More than half the runway is gone. The situation is dire. They have just 2,800 feet left to stop. The captain's grip tightens on the controls, eyes fixed on the end of the runway. 10 seconds left. Just 10. The cliff's edge is closing in, with no room for error. The auto brake is set to 2. It should have been set to max for maximum braking. The captain deploys the reverse thrusters and slams on the brakes. The engines engage the reversers, but the plane is still hurtling down the runway. Too fast for comfort. Too close to the edge. With the runway edge rapidly approaching, the captain makes a split-second decision. He stops the reversers and tries a last-ditch attempt to go around. He pushes the throttles forward and the engines surge. But it takes a fraction of a second to spool back up to speed. Seconds that they don't have. And it's too late. They are not going fast enough to take off, and they are not going slow enough to stop safely. The last-minute extra thrust from the engines cancels what little braking power they had left. The cliff's edge is seconds away. The plane barrels forward, and time slows. The plane enters a poorly maintained racer. The right wing smashes into the ILS antenna. "Hold on," someone shouts. The plane smashes through the boundary fence. A final jolt. The Boeing 737 leaves solid ground. The cliff drops away and gravity takes hold. The plane falls down. Impact. The plane shatters in the gorge, torn apart by the force. Fuel tanks rupture. Flames explode. Smoke fills the air. Debris is scattered across the ravine. And the plane splits into 3 sections. The plane has come to a rest about half a kilometer from the boundary fence. And due to the impact and the fire, the plane is entirely destroyed. Emergency services are scrambled, but the terrain is brutal and they are remote. Minutes tick by. Local villagers drawn by the crash arrive at the scene. They become the first responders. With no equipment, no training, and just sheer determination, they sift through the wreckage, pulling survivors out. Their actions save precious time before official crews arrive. But it's a sad scene. Out of 166 souls, only 8 survive. In the aftermath, investigators begin unraveling the catastrophe. They piece together data, listen to the cockpit voice recordings, and they discover a haunting truth. If the captain had applied full brakes and held reverse thrust, the plane might have stopped within the overrun. But his last-second choice to attempt a go-around, a move that the rules prohibited, sealed the fate of Flight 812. Throttles forward, brakes released, just when they needed them the most. Geneva, this is Air India 101. We are Abhi Mont Blanc.
Negative, Air India 101. You are 5 miles away.
An Air India Boeing 707 is flying over the Alps. They are trying to land in Geneva, but their navigation instruments aren't working. The captain is not sure where he is. Outside it is dark and the clouds are thick. It is snowing heavily. Visibility below the clouds is 0. The plane enters the cloud layer. Somewhere ahead of them is Mont Blanc. Inside the plane sits Dr. Homi Bhabha. He is leading India's nuclear weapons program and he is a huge target for India's political rivals. In the Geneva control tower, a radar operator stares at the plane on his screen. He sees the plane's blip descending. He didn't clear it to land. And suddenly, the blip disappears from screen. The plane never lands in Geneva. But this isn't the first time. 16 years earlier, another Air India flight disappeared over Mont Blanc in eerily similar conditions. This is the story of Air India Flight 101.
Wings.
January 24th, 1966. Bombay's Santa Cruz Airport. Air India 101 is preparing for a journey to London. This is a Boeing 707 called the Kanchenjunga. Air India is one of the first airlines in the world to buy the new 707. At the helm is 48-year-old Captain Joseph D'Souza, a seasoned pilot with countless hours in the sky. 16 years earlier, November 3rd, 1950, same airport. Air India Flight 245, the Malabar Princess, a Lockheed Constellation, is also bound for London. This specific plane was the first Air India plane to fly internationally. It's an iconic plane, and India Post had honoured it with its own stamp. Its captain, 31-year-old Alan Saint, has over 1,000 hours of flying time in the sky. But no amount of confidence and experience can prepare them for what lay ahead. 2 planes, 2 journeys, and 1 mountain, Mont Blanc, waiting for them both. 1950. The Malabar Princess lifts off from Bombay and arrives uneventfully in Cairo. 1966. The Kanchenjunga departs Bombay and arrives in Beirut. The next leg for both the planes is treacherous. The planes must cross the European Alps, a region that is notorious for its unpredictable weather and unforgiving terrain. First, let's focus on the Malabar Princess. 1950. The plane departs from Cairo, and soon they are in France flying over the Alps. As soon as they get there, thick clouds begin to form. Visibility is almost zero. This is a time before GPS, and the pilot must make decisions based on their skill, analog instruments, and experience. Suddenly, a thunderstorm appears from nowhere and begins battering the plane. They are flying just above the safe altitude, but flying the plane steady is becoming difficult. As the pilots keep looking outside, trying to find landmarks, inside the plane, the altimeter slowly starts descending. 19,000 feet, 18,000 feet. Somewhere behind these clouds is Mont Blanc. 17,000 feet. The pilots are flying blind. Just a grey expanse everywhere. And then, with absolutely no warning, the peaks of Mont Blanc emerge from behind the grey skies. They are impossibly close to take evasive action. Impact. The plane slams into the mountain at top speed. The collision is catastrophic. Wreckage is scattered across the glacier. There are no survivors. Mont Blanc has claimed its first Air India plane. But 16 years later, the mountain waits once more. The Kanchenjunga is on its way. In Beirut, Captain Joseph D'Souza and his crew are conducting pre-flight checks for Air India 101. This is a special flight. Dr. Homi Bhabha, the father of India's nuclear program, is boarding the plane at Beirut, headed for an important nuclear conference in Vienna. Back in India, history is unfolding. Indira Gandhi is being sworn in as the new Prime Minister after the sudden, mysterious death of Lal Bahadur Shastri just 2 weeks earlier. India is at a crossroad. The nation has fought wars with both China and Pakistan in recent years. 2 years ago, China detonated its first atomic bomb, shifting the balance of power in the region. In response, to protect its sovereignty and to serve as a deterrent against Pakistan and China, India decided to build an atomic bomb as well, led by Dr. Homi Bhabha. He boldly declared, India could build a bomb in 18 months. With the Cold War ongoing, and with India aligning itself closely with Russia, this statement didn't go down well with the United States. At around the same time, international pressure mounted on India to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, a treaty that would have permanently shut the door from India ever developing nuclear weapons. Both Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri and Dr. Homi Bhabha refused to sign. And then, Prime Minister Shastri died under mysterious circumstances. And now, Dr. Bhabha is boarding Air India 101. And there are whispers of forces that preferred he never made it to Vienna. Whilst conducting pre-flight checks, Captain D'Souza identifies a problem with the plane. One of the two VOR receivers is malfunctioning. Back in those days, VORs were how you'd navigate from one place to another. When you are tuned in to a VOR station, you'd know which direction to fly in to reach that station. But in order to know how far away from that station you are, you would use a second receiver for a cross-bearing reference. With two receivers, you'll know both heading and the distance. But with only one receiver, you'll only know which direction to fly in. You won't know where you are. You could be anywhere on the line. Air India's policy allows flights to continue with just one operational VOR receiver. But the final decision rests with the captain. Captain D'Souza faces a choice. VOR systems use very high frequency waves. They require a clear line of sight between the aircraft and the ground station to function. Over mountainous regions like the Alps, these signals can be blocked by towering peaks, causing periodic blackouts. With only one receiver, These blackouts could leave the plane completely blind, like we saw with the Malabar Princess. But grounding the aircraft for repairs isn't a simple choice. It would mean hours of delays, causing a domino effect of disruptions across Air India's tightly packed schedule. And there is one more thing. Dr. Homi Bhabha cannot miss the conference. The show must go on. The engines roar to life, and Air India Flight 101 takes off from Beirut towards the snow-capped peaks of the Alps, and a fate etched in history. The Kanchenjunga slices through the frigid alpine air. Outside, darkness presses against the cockpit window. Thick clouds smother the peaks below. Somewhere beneath that suffocating darkness lies Mont Blanc, silent, waiting. Air India 101 begins its descent towards Geneva, navigating blind in the night sky. Italian ATC hands them over to Geneva Control. A voice crackles through the headset. Air India 101 maintained flight level 190 until passing Mont Blanc. Report passing. Captain D'Souza acknowledges the instruction. For now, they hold altitude. But they are flying blind. With only one working VOR receiver, Air India 101 can only tune into the Geneva VOR for heading calculations, but not to the Lyon VOR for distance measurement. And tonight, in poor visibility, it's not enough. Under such circumstances, pilots can use what's called a procedural descent, a predefined descent pattern used when radar guidance or instruments aren't available. The procedural descent, however, requires them to hold altitude until Mont Blanc and then allows them to begin descending. But wait, if he has no distance measurement, how will he know if he has crossed Mont Blanc? He decides to check how many seconds have passed since his last waypoint and then uses his experience to guess where he is. But tonight, the plane is flying against strong headwinds, which is slowing them down and throwing off his calculations. Just enough to matter. The captain calls the ATC. Air India 101, we are Abim Mont Blanc. His voice is steady. In the Geneva control tower, the radar operator frowns. The blip on his screen doesn't match the report. Negative Air India 101, you are 5 miles from Mont Blanc. The aircraft isn't where the captain believes it to be. It's still approaching the waypoint, not above it. Roger, Air India 101, the captain replies calmly. But 19,000 feet, only 2,300 feet above Mont Blanc's highest peak, is no place for error. Outside, the darkness is absolute. Clouds are everywhere. The peaks are invisible but omnipresent. And then, for some reason, the plane loses altitude. The radar operator sees the blip begin to descend. 18,000 feet. Why is the plane descending? Has he crossed Mont Blanc yet? 17,000 feet. The operator leans closer to the screen. 16,000 feet. His voice sharpens, rising with urgency. Air India 101, do you copy? Static. Air India 101, come in. Nothing. The blip vanishes. The operator stares at the empty radar screen. Silence crashes down on the tower. A plane, its passengers, its crew, its ambitions. All gone. Panic begins to grip the airwaves. Search and rescue teams are scrambled. Helicopters and planes fan out over the icy vastness of the Alps. Memories of the Malabar Princess hang heavy in the minds of the rescuers. For 24 agonizing hours, the silence is deafening. There is no wreckage. There are no survivors. Nothing. But on the second day, a breakthrough. A Swiss search plane spots the wreckage. Scattered across Mont Blanc's unforgiving massif. The scene is harrowing. The temperature plummets to -24 degrees Celsius. Twisted metal lies frozen in time, and fragments of the aircraft pierce the snow-capped slopes. One look tells the rescuers everything they need to know. There are no survivors. 117 lives gone in an instant. And among the dead is Dr. Homi Bhabha. And with him gone, a troubling question begins to echo. Was this tragedy truly an accident? As investigators comb through the wreckage, an unsettling detail emerges. The debris field stretches over 25 kilometers, an unusually vast area. In 1950, when the Malabar Princess met its end in the same place, the wreckage remained concentrated in one place. But here, the remains of the Kanchenjunga are scattered far and wide, across peaks, valleys, and frozen glaciers. But what if the Kanchenjunga never hit the mountain? What if it blew up mid-air and its pieces fell all over the mountain? In 2013, a book titled Conversations with the Crow claimed to expose secret dialogues with a former CIA director. In its pages, the author alleges that the CIA deliberately blew up Air India Flight 101 to eliminate Dr. Homi Bhabha, following the alleged assassination of Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri just weeks earlier. The goal? To derail India's nuclear ambitions. During the Cold War, both the CIA and the KGB were no strangers to covert operations and political assassinations. The theory that Air India 101 was deliberately sabotaged isn't entirely implausible, but skeptics argue that orchestrating such an operation over the treacherous Alps with no traceable evidence left in the wreckage would have been an impossible task. The official investigation, however, paints a more grounded picture. It concludes that the crash was a result of human error compounded by miscommunication. Captain D'Souza, flying with only one operational VOR receiver, relied on approximate time calculations and instinct to judge their position. When Geneva ATC informed him they were 5 miles from Mont Blanc, the captain likely misinterpreted the instruction, believing they had crossed Mont Blanc 5 miles ago. Believing it was now safe to descend, he began the procedural descent. In the cockpit, everything was calm, eerily calm. The altimeter ticked down. 18,000 feet, 17,000 feet, 16,000 feet. The engines hummed steadily. There were no alarms, no frantic voices, just the steady rhythm of routine operations, blind to the catastrophe ahead. And then, the clouds parted. For the briefest of moments, the looming face of Mont Blanc revealed itself. A wall of ice and rock at 15,584 feet. There was no time to react. Impact. The Kanchenjunga was obliterated in an instant. 117 lives gone. Both the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder were never recovered. Without these crucial pieces of evidence, the final moments of Air India 101 remained shrouded in uncertainty. Theories continue to swirl. Questions linger in the freezing winds of Mont Blanc. Was this a tragic miscalculation or a silent execution written in the clouds over the Alps? An Air India Boeing 787 lines up on the runway in Ahmedabad. 9 hours to London ahead.
Air India 171, clear for takeoff.
The plane is cleared for takeoff and it accelerates down runway 23. But seconds after takeoff, something inside the cockpit goes terribly wrong.
Why did you turn it off?
I didn't do it.
And the flight is doomed before it even climbs out of sight. To understand what really happened, we've built a full 3D reconstruction of the final moments. We've recreated the city, the airport, the crash site, and the aircraft's trajectory by stabilizing and matching every frame of available footage. And we found something interesting in the simulation that doesn't match what the prelim report says happened that day. This is a reconstruction of Air India Flight 171. It's 12:30 p.m., 12th June 2025, Ahmedabad. Boarding begins for Air India Flight 171 to London Gatwick. This is one of just 5 weekly flights connecting Gujarat to the UK's huge Indian diaspora. On board today are 230 passengers and 12 crew, business travelers, students, and entire families. But this plane will never make it to London because by 1 p.m., the cabin doors will close, and by 1:40, the aircraft will be gone. The crew signs in at 11:55 a.m. for mandatory breath tests, and they both pass without issue. In command is Captain Sumit Sabharwal, 56 years old, and with more than 15,600 flight hours, over half of them on the Boeing 787. To his right sits First Officer Clive Kunder, just 32, with 3,400 hours in total and 1,100 on the Dreamliner. Aviation runs in his blood. His mother flew for Air India for 3 decades. It's an experienced crew, flying a familiar route. But in less than 15 minutes, a small action between their seats will decide the fate of this flight. By 1:10 p.m., refueling is done, baggage is loaded, boarding is complete, and the cabin doors are closed. The crew have taken on 54,000 kilos of fuel for the 9-hour flight to London. The plane weighs over 200 tons. It's heavy, but still within operational limits. Today is a hot day. The temperature is 36 degrees. Hot days like today make the air thin. There are fewer air molecules available to lift the wings, and there is also less oxygen for the engines to use as well. What this means is that the plane needs more speed to be able to take off. And given that the plane is heavy, Air India 171 will need to use the entire 3,500 meter length of runway 23. But that said, this is also well within the capabilities of the Boeing 787. The plane pushes back at 1:18 p.m. On the bay, the captain moves the 2 engine switches to run. Both engines spool up with their unmistakable whine.
Air India 171, taxi via Papa, Romeo 4, line up and wait, runway 23.
As the aircraft rolls along the taxiways, the crew complete the before takeoff checklists. The speeds to note are V1 at 153 knots, VR at 155, and V2 at 162 knots. After backtracking on runway 23, First Officer Kunder performs a 180-degree turn to position the plane for takeoff. At the far end of the runway is the airport perimeter wall, and beyond that is the dense neighborhood of Meghani Nagar. Visibility is 6 kilometers, winds are light at 240 degrees and 6 knots. It's a perfect day for flying.
Air India 171, winds 240 at 6, runway 23, clear for takeoff.
Clear for takeoff, runway 23, Air India 171.
Takeoff clearance is issued at 1:37:33, and 4 seconds later, First Officer Kunder advances the thrust levers. The plane begins rolling down the runway, and the countdown to disaster begins. What you're about to see is a detailed 3D construction of Flight 171's final moments, recreated second by second, frame by frame. This is Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel International Airport here, built in 1:1 real-life scale. This is runway 23 here, and the crash site is 1.7 kilometers away over here. These 2 structures in red are the student canteens, referred to as buildings A and B in the interim report. Behind them are the 4 student dorms called buildings C through F in the report. The tall chimney here is the Army Medical Corps incinerator, and this small patch of trees right next to the chimney would be the first point of contact. It's 1:38 p.m. and the canteen of BJ Medical College is packed with students having lunch. At the airport nearby, Air India 171 has just taken off and is now at its highest point, just above the airport perimeter wall. As it crosses the wall, the plane begins to lose altitude and it starts deviating towards the left. This camera here is placed exactly on the extended center line, and the deviation to the left is quite clear. I'll explain my theory about this deviation later in the video. Just a minute later, at 1:39:09, the plane is almost near the ground, and it makes first contact with a bunch of trees inside the Army Corps compound. Almost immediately, the nose gear hits the incinerator chimney, and it tears away. The main fuselage is still in one piece, and it continues moving forward at 150 knots. Notice the plane's attitude here. It's at around 8 degrees nose up. What this tells us is that the pilots, even at the very last minute, were pulling back on the control column, trying to get the plane to regain altitude. They were trying to clear the buildings, but unfortunately, they couldn't. At 1:39:10, the right side of the fuselage strikes building A's northeast wall. The right landing gear and the tail section take a brunt of the impact here. The vertical stabilizer separates instantly and is flung more than 200 feet away. The tail section, containing the rear flight recorder and the emergency locator transmitter, embeds in the wall of Building A. Almost at the same time, the right wing clips the roof of the nearby Building B, causing it to tear away from the fuselage. Pieces of this wing are found scattered near Buildings A and B. The fuselage continues moving forward and the right engine impacts a solid water tank on the roof of Building A. The engine mount fails and the engine lodges beneath the tank. Most of the right side of the plane is now gone. What's left of it keeps moving forward. The left main landing gear and the left wing impacts the main wall of Building C, causing them to shear off from the fuselage. The left engine breaks free from the housing due to this impact and is flung forward to near Building D's ground floor. Since the plane was full of fuel, the impact causes an almost instantaneous explosion, reducing a perfectly functional aircraft to mere fragments within 2.5 seconds. So this is the crash sequence. But the big question is, what really happened during the takeoff phase that caused the plane to crash? And we have simulated that frame by frame as well. And there's something that we found that doesn't match what the prelim report says happened. The first step in any air crash investigation is locating the two black boxes. The Boeing 787 carries two enhanced airborne flight recorders, one mounted on the front and the second mounted in the tail. Although they were both recovered within days of the crash, the tail unit, which absorbed the full force of the Building A impact, was destroyed due to extensive thermal damage, and the data was unrecoverable. The forward recorder survived. In order to extract data from the damaged forward recorder, the AAIB needed an identical working chassis to place the memory module in before reading it. This is called a golden chassis. However, the AAIB didn't have a golden chassis nor the cables to do the job, and so they had to import it from the NTSB in the US. Now I want you to think about this for a second. India operates dozens of 787s. Air India alone has over 30 in its fleet. Yet, the country's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau doesn't have the ability to download data from a flight recorder of one of the most common aircraft types in the world. Make of that what you may. Okay, so now it's time for the simulation. I've already mentioned that we found something that doesn't match what the prelim report says. But in order for you to believe the data, I need to earn your trust that the simulation is actually correct. And the best way to do that is to show you how we simulated the flight path. I had a lot of fun doing it, so whether you like it or not, I'm going to show you how I did it. We've already modeled the entire airport and the runway and the airplane in 3D. Now, we need to know what the actual flight path is. In order to recreate the flight path, we need to know how the actual AI-171 flew on that day. And for that, we'll use this CCTV footage as our reference. Problem is, it's very shaky. So to make it usable, we'll first need to stabilize it. I've done that using Photoshop, frame by frame, which gives me the actual position of the plane at every single frame. But for me to now match the 3D plane with this image, I need to see through a virtual camera that matches this camera. And so, I need to know three things. Where was this CCTV camera placed in the real world? What type of camera was this so that I can find the sensor size? And what focal length was the camera filming at? To figure out where the camera was placed in the real world, I used this watchtower and these two road markings and this gate and cross-referenced it with Google Maps. If you look closely at this footage, you can see a security camera mounted on a pole at a height of around 15 feet. Our camera is probably mounted on a nearby pole at a similar height. I then used a tool called F-Spy to triangulate the exact location of the camera to right here. Second, I need to know what type of camera it is so that I can find the sensor size. Again, from this footage, we know that we are working with a PTZ camera. And after searching on YouTube for a long time, I finally found this footage from Elite Aviation's channel showing a close-up of the camera used at Ahmedabad Airport. Searching more on Google, I found that the cameras used in Ahmedabad Airport is made by a company called Infinova, and the sensor size that they use is approximately 1/2 inches. The third unknown is the focal length. And getting that was the tedious part. Since this is a zoom camera, it could be anything. So, it was a manual process of locking the camera in place and playing with the virtual camera's focal length until the 3D environment matched the source footage. And once the camera was locked, I matched the 3D airplane at each frame with the position of the real AI-171 in the footage. And this gave me the reconstructed flight path. To validate the flight path, I used this second image, the rat photograph from the interim report. From this camera's position, I again have a good match with the ground plane, the background terminals, and this tower. And if I scrub through, you can see that the 3D plane almost exactly matches the plane in the image. We now have everything we need to know how this plane flew on that day. This simulation is running at 30 frames per second, and so every frame is 1/30th of a second. We'll start at the takeoff roll.
Air India 171, winds 240 at 6, runway 23, cleared for takeoff. Cleared for takeoff, runway 23, Air India 171.
The takeoff roll begins at 1:37:37. First Officer Kunder advances the thrust levers and both engines spool smoothly to take off power. The flaps are set to 5 degrees, the standard configuration for a Dreamliner takeoff. This is confirmed from the wreckage as well. From the simulation flight path, we can calculate the ground speed and the altitude of the plane at any frame. And since the wind on the day was 240 degrees at 6 knots, we can also calculate the indicated airspeed at each frame. I've exported all this to an Excel sheet and used it in this simulation. We'll start by going through the timeline as per the official report, and then later I'll introduce my findings and open up some questions. So the plane begins a takeoff roll at 1:37:37 and it continues to gain speed for the next 56 seconds until frame 539, at which point it hits the V1 speed of 153 knots. V1 is the speed at which the plane now has to take off, as there is not enough runway left to stop safely. 2 seconds later, frame 599 is VR, and the front nose wheel begins to lift. The prelim report says that the speed at this time is 155 knots. Our simulation says 154 knots, so till now the data agrees. It takes another 4 seconds until frame 668 for the main landing gear to lift off the runway. The weight on the wheel sensor now transitions the plane from ground mode to air mode. The plane then continues to climb for the next 3 seconds normally. And then at 1:38:42, the plane reaches its max speed of 180 knots. Immediately after that, the fuel cutoff switches for engine 1 and engine 2 move to the cutoff position. 5 seconds after this point, at time 1:38:47, the ram air turbine starts producing hydraulic power. Somewhere between these 2 points, one pilot asks the other, "Why did you turn it off?" And the other pilot says that he did not. 5 more seconds later, at 1:38:52, the left engine switch goes back to the run position. And 4 seconds later, the right engine switch goes back to the run position as well. And a mayday call was given at 1:39:05. So this is what the prelim report says has happened. I want to direct your attention to this frame here at 7:58, specifically to these 3 events. The report says that the plane hits a maximum speed of 180 knots, and immediately afterwards, the 2 engine switches are switched off. But intuitively, you would expect the speed to stop rising once the engines are shut off, not before it, right? The plane is accelerating at takeoff thrust. Takeoff thrust is the maximum power that the engine can produce. In that configuration, I find it odd that the report claims that the max speed was hit before the engine cut off. And this was the whole reason why I wanted to simulate the crash in the first place. And the simulation seems to confirm my suspicions. As per this simulation, as the plane rolls down the runway, the sim speed matches what the interim report says until frame 758 at 180 knots. But after that, instead of slowing down, the sim plane actually keeps accelerating for the next 5 seconds until frame 900, up to a speed of 196 knots. The momentum of the takeoff causes the plane to gain altitude until frame 1100, up to a height of 230 feet. Inside a jet engine, once the fuel is cut off, the thrust will collapse almost instantly. Any high pressure gases that remain in the engine will be flushed out in under a second. So this cannot be any residual thrust that's pushing the plane forward. I've thought about this a lot, but I've not been able to come up with an explanation as to why the plane would keep increasing in speed for 5 seconds after the engine shut off, and why the prelim report claims that the max speed was hit before the engine shutting off. So I'm putting this to the experts watching. If you know what could create a 5-second rise in indicated airspeed after cutoff, I'm very curious to hear from you. And now this brings us to the fuel cutoff switches itself. What exactly happened here? To understand this better, we need to address 4 different theories. First, the switch was intentionally moved to the cutoff position by someone in the cockpit. Second, the switch was accidentally moved by someone in the cockpit. Third, a software feature caused the 2 switches to trip and move to the cutoff position automatically without pilot input. And fourth, the switches never moved to the cutoff position and some other system in the plane caused the engines to flame out. Let's start with theory 4 and work our way backwards. This theory claims that the switches never actually moved to the cutoff position and that the engine simply failed for some other reason. To explain why this doesn't hold up, let's use a simple analogy. Your cars have black boxes too. Imagine your car is running. If you turn the ignition switch off, the black box records 2 things. Ignition off is equal to true, engine off is equal to true. But if your car runs out of fuel and the engine dies on its own, only one thing gets recorded. Engine off is equal to true. There is no entry for the ignition because you never touched the key. The same logic applies to the Boeing 787. The black box from the flight shows an entry for the fuel cutoff switches being moved to cutoff. And here is the important part. If you look at the wiring diagram, there is just a single data line labeled RDC that runs straight from the physical switch to the flight recorder. Its only job is to record the real, physical position of the switch. The way it does this is that every 1 second, the flight computer will check what the status of the switch is and record it. That 1 second is called the sampling frequency. So if the recorder shows cutoff is equal to true, that means that the switch itself was physically moved there. There is no software trick or no false signal. This is a direct mechanical reading, which means that we can discard theory 4. The switches really did move to cutoff. Now let's visit theory 3, that a software feature in the plane caused the 2 switches to trip to cutoff on its own without any pilot input. This is specifically referring to the TCMA, the Thrust Control Malfunction Accommodation. This is a software feature in the plane that will automatically reduce the thrust in an engine or even cut it out entirely if it believes the engine's power is exceeding safe limits. This has happened before to an All Nippon Airways 787, but that was during the landing phase and the plane landed safely. The question to answer is, could the TCMA have triggered the engines to shut down on Air India 171? Here's the wiring diagram for these cutoff switches again. Apart from the data connection, the only other circuit to the 2 switches is a relay, with just a true or a false status. There is no wiring to the switches that is able to trigger it automatically to move to the cutoff position based on a software trigger. Now the other thing about the TCMA is that the TCMA doesn't work through the cockpit fuel switches at all. Instead, it physically closes a high pressure shutoff valve deep inside the engine, cutting off fuel supply directly. Once this valve closes, it cannot be reversed by the pilots, and it requires maintenance action to reset the system. This is exactly what happened to that ANA 787. The pilots couldn't restart the engines and the plane had to be towed to the gate. But in the case of Air India 171, we know that the engines restarted successfully later in flight based on the events here. If the TCMA was the root cause, the engines could not have restarted. So this isn't a TCMA failure and we can discard theory 3 as well. Now this brings us to theory 2, accidental activation. The switches have 3 levels of safeguards to prevent accidental activation. First, the switch is spring-loaded, and so it needs to be pinched and lifted against spring pressure to move it. Second, there are raised guards near the switches to prevent the hand from accidentally touching it. And third, there are mechanical stops near the base which also prevents accidental activation. Now somehow, even if an accidental movement occurred, I'd expect one switch to have accidentally moved. I struggle to see how both switches accidentally activated within a 1 second gap. So I'm going to place theory 2 as very unlikely. And this brings us to theory 1. The most prevalent claim in the media against this theory is that it is impossible for these switches to be moved manually within 1 second of each other. I am not sure where this theory began, because to the contrary, here's a video by Fahad Naim showing that it is definitely possible to do just that. This is the only theory that I have no arguments against. Let's also quickly discuss why the landing gear wasn't retracted, which seemed to be a main topic of contention in the media. For the landing gear to be retracted, the pilot monitoring needs to check for a positive rate of climb. This means that the pilot monitoring has observed that the plane is gaining altitude without issue. Only after positive rate of climb is ensured is the gear up call given, and the gear is then retracted. Now, if the first engine began to spool down at frame 758, and the plane at this time is just at 55 feet off the ground, this is just not enough time to verify that a positive rate of climb has been achieved. So gear up call would never have been given, and so the gear remained out for the rest of the flight. Okay, I'm recording this much later and this might sound like a ramble, but I initially didn't want to include this, but I'm going to include it anyway. I wanted to quickly talk about the two black boxes and the electronic locator transmitter. Now, the ELT is a device that sends out radio signals when there is a crash, and it is used by the rescue teams to identify where the crash happened. So look back to something like Germanwings 9525 or MH370. In those cases, they were trying to locate where the crash happened based on this signal. But in the case of Air India 171, the electronic locator transmitter just didn't work, and the prelim report just has a single line which says that the ELT never activated. If the ELT didn't work, there are two reasons why it might not have. One is that the pilots never armed the ELT. There is a switch on the top panel above the first officer where the ELT can be in an reset position, an armed position, or an on position. If the ELT is placed in the reset position, then it won't work. But it is quite unlikely that they left it at reset. The more plausible explanation is that the ELT is actually mounted right next to the rear black box, and the ELT suffered a very similar damage to what the rear black box suffered. What bugs me here is that the black box and the ELT are designed for one specific purpose. They are designed to survive a crash. This impact was a low-speed, low-altitude crash, and still, the black box and the ELT, whose only job it is to survive a crash, didn't survive. And I really want to know in the final report why that happened. This simulation is an honest attempt to piece together what might have happened on that fateful day, given the limits of the footage and the prelim report that is available to us. If anything, it was a learning exercise for me, and something I wanted to share with the community. The two planes never saw each other. On the evening of November 12, 1996, two giants hurtle through the skies over Delhi, each trusting the voice on the radio to keep them safe. One is climbing, one is descending. Just 1,000 feet separates them, but that gap will vanish in a heartbeat. How could two planes, both talking to the same controller, end up crashing in the sky? Who made the fatal mistake? What really happened that day? This is the story of the Charkhi Dadri disaster, the deadliest mid-air collision in aviation history. Shymkent International Airport, Kazakhstan. It's early afternoon, and on the ramp, a Russian-built Ilyushin 76 is preparing for the 4-hour trip to New Delhi. On board are 27 passengers and 10 crew members. Although this airline is on the brink of bankruptcy, it is keeping itself alive by flying charter flights like the one planned for today. 27 merchants from the neighboring country of Kyrgyzstan have paid for this jet to take them to Delhi to buy Indian textiles and to bring them back home to sell at a profit. It is not a glamorous journey, but it keeps the airline afloat. At 3:55 p.m. Indian time, the 4-engine giant rumbles down the runway and lifts into the Kazakh sky. In Delhi, at the same time, a Saudia 747 lands from Jeddah, and by 6 p.m. it will depart again, packed with blue-collared Indian laborers heading back to the Gulf to keep their families afloat. Although these two flights have very different paths, in a way, they carry the same story. People leaving home, chasing a living in distant lands. And neither crew knows it yet, but their paths are about to cross. And the skies over Delhi will never be the same again. The flight from Shymkent to Delhi isn't very long, just about 3.5 hours, roughly the same as flying from Bangalore to Delhi. The Illusion is cruising smoothly at 33,000 feet. So far, everything is routine. 2 hours into the flight, the Illusion approaches Delhi. They are entering one of the most complex airspaces in the region, where every altitude and every instruction matters. At 6:23 p.m., the aircraft crosses a waypoint called Lunka. The crew calls Delhi approach, requesting clearance to begin their descent.
Delhi approach Kazakh 1907 at waypoint Lunka at flight level 250.
Delhi approach clears them down to 20,000 feet.
Kazakh 1907 descend and maintain flight level 200.
And at that very same moment in Delhi, a Saudi Arabian Boeing 747 is preparing for departure. The jumbo jet is bound for Jeddah with a scheduled stop in Dhahran. On board are 32 crew members and 289 passengers. Many of them are Indian laborers heading to the Gulf to provide for their families back home. Boarding is complete and the doors are sealed. And the controller's voice cuts through.
Saudi 763 pushback approved.
At the controls is Captain Khalid Al-Shubaili. He is 44, a Saudi national with nearly 10,000 hours in the air. Beside him sits an American first officer, 39-year-old Nazir Khan. And behind them is the 36-year-old flight engineer Ahmed Adris. Like their Kazakh counterparts, they are also a seasoned crew, deeply familiar with the Boeing 747 and with the quirks of the tricky skies about Delhi. They've had over 70 hours of rest before this flight, and by every standard, they are fit, alert, and ready to fly. At 6:33 p.m.,
Saudi 763 cleared for takeoff.
the four engines roar to life. The massive jet accelerates down runway 28, slicing through the evening haze, and climbs into the cloud-covered Delhi skies. As the 747 climbs, the Kazakh Illusion is just 100 kilometers away, descending towards Delhi. And they are both being guided by the same voice. Approach controller VK Datta. VK Datta is 43 years old. He is an experienced mid-level controller at Delhi's airport. But in 1996, India had no formal licensing system for air traffic controllers. Most learned the craft through on-the-job training and experience. And right now, he's having a busy night. He has 5 planes demanding his immediate attention. The Saudi 747 that's climbing out of Delhi, the inbound Kazakh Illusion, 2 other domestic flights that are already airborne, and a US Air Force plane that's descending into Delhi. But Datta's biggest challenge isn't the number of aircraft. It's the Delhi airspace itself. In 96, Delhi was an anomaly. Unlike major airports around the world, which had separate corridors for arrivals and for departures, Delhi had just one corridor for both. The skies surrounding Delhi were mostly under military control. India's defense policy prioritized military airspaces, and commercial flights were allocated just a single highway in the sky, called Golf 452. Although the volume of commercial flights was increasing in the country, all that additional traffic had to squeeze into the same existing single highway. And at one end of that highway is the waypoint Lunka, where the Kazakh plane is at right now. And at the other end, just entering the route, is the Saudi 747. The Saudi crew check in with Datta.
Delhi approached Saudi 763, climbing through flight level 080 for 100.
Saudi 763, roger in a contract, climb to flight level 100.
The Kazakh plane, at this time, is at 23,000 feet and they are descending down to 18,000 feet. Datta gives them updated instructions.
Kazakh 1907, descend flight level 150, report reaching 150, Kazakh 1907.
Keep this call in mind because what's been said and what's been understood will soon become critical. Barely a minute passes and the Saudi jet reaches 10,000 feet that they were cleared to.
Delhi approach Saudi 763 at flight level 100.
Saudi 763, Roger, climb and maintain flight level 140.
And so now, the stage for disaster is set. Both the Saudi jet and the Kazakh jet are flying head-on route 452. The 747 is at 10,000 feet and they have been cleared to 14,000 feet. The Kazakh Illusion is 80 kilometers away at 20,000 feet, cleared to descend down to 15,000 feet. Datta's plan is simple. He plans to let them cross each other with a 1,000 feet of vertical separation and to then let them proceed with their journey. You'd think that with aircraft flying this close to each other, Datta would have a modern radar, one that shows altitude, speed, and even proximity warnings. But he doesn't. What he has is just an outdated primary radar, a radar that displays each plane as a glowing dot on a screen. He doesn't have altitude or distance information. The only way for him to know at what altitude the planes are flying is by literally asking the pilots to tell him. And if someone makes a mistake, there is no second line of defense. Right now, on Datta's screen, he can see the dots of the Saudi plane and the Kazakh plane inch closer together. As long as they stay 1,000 feet apart, they'll pass over each other safely. But till now, he hasn't told either plane that another jet is nearby. We are now on the ground at the crash site. Investigators begin piecing the story together from the debris. They soon recover the black boxes from both the planes. But because India didn't have the technology to decode these black boxes, the Kazakh recorder was sent to Moscow and the Saudi recorder was sent to London to be read. While those tapes are being analyzed, investigators begin combing through the wreckage field. The wreckage stretches for over 7 kilometers across the Haryana farmlands. And amid the debris, they find their first clue. They recover the tail section of the Kazakh plane at the very start of the wreckage field. And that tells a story. For the tail section to be at the start of the trail, it can only mean that the tail section broke off first right at the moment of impact. But the Illusion has a high tail design. And according to ATC instructions, the Kazakh plane was supposed to pass above the Saudi jet. For the tail of the plane to be the first point of contact means that for some reason, the Kazakh plane was lower than it should have been. Which raises the question, did the Kazakh crew descend too far? Or did the Saudi jet climb too high? Or did ATC give them both incorrect instructions? Until the black box recordings return from Moscow and London, investigators can't know for sure. But they have one crucial piece of evidence with them already. The ATC transmissions recorded in the control tower at Delhi. We are now back at 6:37 p.m. It's been 1 minute since we last heard from the crews. The Kazakh plane is descending down to 15,000 feet and the Saudi plane is climbing to 14,000 feet. It's now 3 minutes to impact. Inside the tower, VK Datta is watching his radar. The Kazakh crew reaches out, requesting permission to go lower.
Delhi approach Kazakh 1907 at 170 for 150.
Kazakh 1907, Roger, maintain flight level 150.
And about 30 seconds later, the Saudi crew calls in, requesting permission to go higher.
Delhi approach Saudi 763 at flight level 140 requesting 200.
Saudi 763, maintain flight level 140, stand by for higher.
With these clearances, the Saudi jet will safely pass 1,000 feet below the Kazakh jet. Datta makes a note of these clearances on strips of paper near him. That's all the automation that he has for today. The two blips continue to move towards each other. He knows that they are close, but he doesn't know the altitude that they are at. So he checks in with the crew again.
Kazakh 1907, how far from Delhi are you?
Now reached flight level 150, 46 miles from Delhi on the 270 radial.
Kazakh has just reported reaching 15,000 feet. But later, investigations will reveal that the plane at this point was actually at 16,400 feet. Datta, of course, wouldn't have known that. So he accepts the report and continues.
Roger, maintain flight level 150, traffic 12 o'clock reciprocal, Saudi Boeing 747 at 10 miles, likely to cross in another 5 miles, report in sight.
This is the first time that either crew is told that there's another aircraft nearby. Inside the Kazakh cockpit, there's a pause. Voices can be heard in the background. The crew are discussing the traffic in Russian, trying to locate it visually. There is a long silence.
Kazakh 1907, report how many miles?
Traffic is at 8 miles, level 140.
Okay, now looking. Kazakh 1907.
This is the last transmission we'll ever hear from Kazakh 1907. The blips continue to close in. Datta turns his attention to the Saudi jet.
Saudi 763, traffic 12 o'clock reciprocal, Kazakh Illusion 76 at 6 miles, likely to cross in another 3 miles, report in sight.
Looking for traffic, Saudi 763.
This is the last transmission from the Saudi jet. There's nothing more for Datta to do. It's 1 minute to impact. When investigators review the tapes, they find no errors on Datta's actions. With his primitive radar, he had no way of verifying the plane's actual altitudes. He did everything by the book. Investigators are so confident in his performance that Datta is allowed to return to duty just 3 days after the crash. With Datta being cleared, that leaves just two possibilities. Something went wrong in the Kazakh cockpit, or something went wrong in the Saudi one. In the wreckage field, the investigators locate the altimeters of the Kazakh plane. And what they see only deepens the mystery. The Kazakh plane had 4 different altimeters, and each of the 4 altimeters showed a different altitude. The captain's barometric altimeter showed 16,700 feet. His electronic altimeter showed 14,560 feet. The first officer's altimeter showed 14,895 feet, and the navigator's showed 1,720 feet. 4 altimeters, 4 numbers, none of them the same. Let's assume that the 1720 feet reading is due to the impact. Remember that the Saudi plane was cleared to fly at 14,000 feet? Every other reading on these altimeters are above 14,000 feet. But we already know from the tail being found at the start of the wreckage that the Kazakh plane was below the Saudi plane at the point of impact. So this could only mean that the Saudi plane climbed above their cleared altitude of 14,000 feet. 2 weeks later, the black box data arrives, and it confuses the investigators even further. Although the primary suspects right now are the Saudi crew, the flight data recorder from the Saudi plane paints a very different picture. The data shows that the Saudi plane had a smooth, uneventful climb up to 14,000
Saudi
feet.
763 will maintain 140.
The pilots then pull the throttles back and they level the plane off at 14,108 feet. The 747 was exactly where they were told to be. The Kazakh data, on the other hand, was baffling. In stark contrast to the Saudi graph, the Kazakh altitude graph looked like a staircase pattern. It showed the plane holding steady for a few seconds, and then a sudden drop. Steady again for a few seconds, and then a sudden drop. This was nothing like what the investigators had seen before. What exactly was happening in this cockpit? The Illusion 76 was originally built for Soviet military use, and so it had a 5-person crew, with dedicated members to handle navigation and the radio, so that the pilots could focus entirely on flying. In the cockpit today are Captain Alexander Sharapanov, First Officer Emerek Zhangirov, Flight Engineer Alexander Shuprov, Radio Operator Igor Rep, and on the lower deck, Navigator Jahanbek Aripabev. But more people in the cockpit doesn't always mean better flying. In this cockpit, only Igor Rep, the radio operator, spoke enough English to handle ATC calls. All the other 4 members, including the pilots flying, only spoke Russian. So, every ATC clearance that had been received had to be translated into Russian and then relayed to the pilots and the navigator. They essentially were playing Russian whispers inside the cockpit. And that wasn't the only translation that was going on inside the plane. The Ilyushin, like all Soviet airplanes, was originally designed to be an all-metric plane. Unlike Western airplanes that measured altitude in feet, the Ilyushin measured altitude in meters. To be able to fly outside Russia though, 2 of the 4 altimeters were retrofitted to measure the altitude in feet. But importantly, the altimeter in front of the first officer who was flying the plane was still using meters. So the navigator had to translate every ATC clearance from feet to meters and relay it to the first officer. Inside this crowded cockpit, confusion was almost inevitable. Let's rejoin the plane 4 minutes before the crash as the radio operator informs ATC that they have reached 15,000 feet.
Delhi approach Kazakh 1907, now reach flight level 150, 46 miles from Delhi on the 270 radial.
Although he claims they are at 15,000 feet, the flight data recorder will show that they were really at 16,400 feet at this time. So why did he give an incorrect reading? We can't know for sure, but the radio operator does not have an altimeter in front of him. He'd only be able to see the first officer's altimeter by awkwardly looking around the first officer. It is possible that he either just assumed that they had reached 15,000 feet, or he incorrectly converted from metric to feet. It is also possible that he misunderstood the words reached and approaching, which might have added to the confusion. Either way, ATC Datta takes the information at face value and issues the next instruction with information about the Saudi plane.
Roger, maintain flight level 150. Traffic 12 o'clock, reciprocal Saudi Boeing 747, 10 miles at 14,000 feet. Likely to cross in another 5 miles, report in sight.
All planes on Datta's frequency would have been able to hear each other. So the Kazakh plane would have heard all the transmissions between Datta and the Saudi plane so far. So they should have expected the Saudi plane to be there. But inside the Kazakh cockpit, you can hear confusion. The crew discussing the traffic in Russian, trying to visualize where the other plane is. And after a long silence, Rep asks again,
Kazakh 1907, report how many miles?
Traffic is at 8 miles, level 140.
Now looking, Kazakh 1907.
At that moment, the plane finally passes through 15,000 feet. Its assigned altitude. It should level off here. The Saudi jet is just 900 feet below them, closing in fast from the opposite direction. But the Kazakh Ilyushin doesn't stop. It keeps descending. For 30 long seconds, no one says a word. And the altimeter spins down. 14,800, 14,600, 14,400. Outside, the sky is overcast, and the plane slips into a large white cloud. The Saudi 747 enters the same cloud from the opposite direction. 10 seconds to disaster. At 6:40 p.m., a sudden voice breaks through the noise inside the Kazakh cockpit. It's Igor Rep, the radio operator, shouting,
Hold the level!
He's finally seen it. The altimeter. They are too low. But instead of immediately leveling off, Captain Sharapanov hesitates.
What level have we given?
The captain is unsure about the cleared altitude. Flight engineer Shuprov, who's been silent until now, blurts out,
Maintain!
without saying what level they are supposed to be maintaining. Only Rep knows what it means.
Keep to level 150, don't descend.
He yells. Panic hits. Sharapanov realizes a mistake. He slams the autopilot disconnect and calls for more power to the flight engineer. The engines spool up, screaming. Rep shouts again, his voice trembling.
Get to 150, because at 140, that one!
In that instant, he must have seen it. A flash through the clouds. The massive 747 charging straight towards them. There's no time. The Ilyushin 76 slams into the Boeing 747 with unimaginable force. A heartbeat later, the 747 slices through the Ilyushin's tail, shearing it clean off. For a brief, horrifying moment, the two giants are locked together inside a blazing fireball, and they then break apart, spiraling downwards from 14,000 feet. Debris rains over the villages below. The sky burns orange. Inside Delhi approach control, VK Datta watches in disbelief as the two blips merge on his radar, and then fail to separate, and then disappear altogether. Seconds later, his radio crackles. A desperate voice screams in Arabic.
Astaghfirullah, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah.
God grant forgiveness. I witness no other God but Allah. Datta calls again and again and again. No one responds. In the weeks after the disaster, the Indian government convened a board of inquiry led by Justice R.C. Lahoti. There were two questions that needed to be answered. Why did the Kazakh plane keep descending? And why did the data recorder show a step-like pattern? The Lahoti report concluded that although the radio operator acknowledged the clearance to maintain 15,000 feet, the first officer who was flying the plane may have misheard the phrase 14,000, referring to the altitude of the Saudi aircraft, as a new instruction for them to descend further. The report claims a tragic language misinterpretation caused the crash. The investigators concluded that the staircase pattern was due to a faulty sensor, and so they set that theory aside. As a direct aftermath of this crash, Kazakhstan Airlines, which was already on the brink of bankruptcy, ceased operations, and its assets were transferred to the newly formed Air Kazakhstan, which itself again went bankrupt in 2004 and then became Air Astana, which is still flying today. Following this accident, the Indian government revealed that there had been 10 recent near misses in Indian skies, most involving airlines from former Soviet nations, and many of these problems were blamed on the pilots' poor understanding of English. Indian ATC personnel also went on strike, demanding formal licensing and improved training. They also demanded the creation of new civilian corridors around Delhi to make the Delhi skies safer. India also petitioned the ICAO that Level 4 English proficiency be mandated for pilots and air traffic controllers across the world, which was later internationally adopted. India also became the second nation internationally, after the US, to mandate the use of TCAS, the Traffic Collision Avoidance System, in its skies. But the worst part is, many of the victims' bodies were never identified, and some of them came from such deeply poverty-stricken rural backwaters that their next of kin were never identified either. Somewhere out there are almost certainly families who have no idea that their missing brother, sister, son, or daughter died aboard Saudi Arabian Flight 763. For all they know, their loved ones simply went away and never came back.
Air India 855, clear for takeoff.
Air India Flight 855 has just taken off from runway 27 at Bombay. The plane crosses into the Arabian Sea. Suddenly, something in the cockpit goes terribly wrong. The captain turns the yoke and puts the plane into a hard left bank. The plane begins turning 20 degrees, 30 degrees. The nose drops. The plane starts gaining speed, but the captain doesn't let go. He keeps banking left.
Level off, Captain, now!
The captain doesn't respond. He doesn't level off. He keeps banking more. They are just 2,000 feet above the water. The bank angle keeps increasing. The nose keeps dropping, and the plane continues hurtling towards the ocean below. What happens next? Let's find out. This is the story of Air India Flight 855. January 1st, 1978, Bombay. Boarding begins for Air India Flight 855 to Dubai. The city is buzzing with New Year's celebration as the plane prepares for a routine 3.5-hour hop across the Arabian Sea. 190 passengers and 23 crew settle into the 747-200. Business travelers heading to the booming Gulf economy. Families visiting relatives. Some perhaps nursing New Year's hangovers, looking forward to a quiet flight. By 8 p.m., the cabin doors will close. By 8:12, the wheels will be up. And by 8:13, everyone will be dead. The crew signs in at 7 p.m. and they board the plane. In the left seat is 51-year-old Captain Madan Lal Kukkar. Now, when I tell you that this man was experienced, I mean experienced. He has over 18,000 hours of flying behind him. That's more than 2 full years spent in the sky. He joined Air India back in 1956, making him one of the airline's most senior pilots. Sitting next to him is 43-year-old First Officer Indu Veermani. Indu is a former Indian Air Force wing commander with 4,500 flight hours. By all accounts, he is also a disciplined, skilled and competent pilot. Older 747s needed a third pilot, a flight engineer to man the instruments. That was the job of 53-year-old flight engineer Alfred Faria. He joined the airline way back in 1955 and he was Air India's senior-most engineer. 3 experienced professionals, a modern aircraft and a clear night. What could possibly go wrong? By 8 p.m., refueling is done. The baggage is loaded and boarding is complete. And the cabin doors are closed. The plane pushes back at 8:05 p.m. All 4 engines spool up.
Air India 855, line up and wait, runway 27.
Visibility is 6 kilometers. Winds are light at 240 degrees and 6 knots. It's a perfect night for flying.
Air India 855, winds 240 at 6, runway 27, cleared for takeoff.
Cleared for takeoff, runway 27, Air India 855.
At 8:12 p.m., the 4 massive Pratt & Whitney engines roar to life. The 747 accelerates down runway 27, heading west towards the Arabian Sea. The takeoff is picture perfect. It's smooth, it's controlled, exactly by the book. Air traffic control clears them to climb to 8,000 feet. The massive aircraft begins its ascent, passing through 1,500 feet as it crosses Mumbai's coastline. And this is where the geography of Mumbai becomes crucial. Mumbai's airport sits right next to the coast. When you take off to the west, you go from a well-lit city environment to complete darkness over the ocean in less than a minute. One moment you have visual references. You have the city lights, you have the ground, and you have the buildings. And the next moment, you have nothing. Just the black void of the Arabian Sea. The moon was also in its waning phase, and so the moonlight wasn't adequate either. But for experienced pilots, this is routine. You transition from visual flight to instrument flight. You move your eyes from the window to the instruments on the panels below. These instruments are now your entire world. You trust what these gauges tell you, not what your body feels. The standard instrument departure for runway 27 requires the pilots to take a right turn after climbing out into the sea. Captain Cooker moves the yoke to the right to start the right turn. The aircraft begins to bank gently. The captain looks at the attitude indicator. The plane slowly reaches a shallow 15-degree bank. The heading indicator starts counting up. 275 degrees, 285 degrees. Everything is going according to plan. But at this exact point, something inside the plane goes terribly wrong. Within 10 seconds, the plane reaches a heading of 300, their intended heading towards Dubai. The captain turns the yoke slightly to the left to bring the plane back to level flight. He looks at the attitude indicator for confirmation, but in the gauge, nothing happens. He applies more pressure, still nothing. The gauge shows the plane still in a right bank. More pressure, but try as hard as he may, the aircraft refuses to follow his orders. The plane just keeps banking right. Outside, it is complete darkness and the captain has no visual cues. The plane is just 3,000 feet off the ground and the aircraft refuses to follow the captain's command. The captain is now in a state of utter confusion. He has never experienced this in his 18,000 hours of flying. He has never trained for this either. He increases the pressure on the yoke, moving it to the left even further. His body can feel the plane turn to the left, but his instrument is telling him that the plane is in a right turn. His eyes can't see the horizon outside. He is getting conflicting information from each of his senses.
What's happened here? My instruments!
Captain Cooker is experiencing spatial disorientation, one of the most dangerous things to happen to a pilot in the sky. And this is why pilots are trained endlessly to trust your instruments, trust your instruments, trust your instruments. And Captain Cooker is now doing exactly that. He is trusting his instrument. The instrument is telling him that the plane is turning right. so he ignores all his other senses. He pushes the yoke further to the left to try to bring the plane back to level. But the plane doesn't respond. The plane seems to have a mind of its own, and it continues turning right. But what the captain doesn't know is that the instrument that he's relying upon is lying to him. That instrument is stuck and it is no longer working. There was nothing wrong with the aircraft, and the plane had returned to wings level seconds earlier. But with the captain continuing to turn the yoke to the left, the plane has now started banking the other way. Let's assume that you are flying this plane during the day and you need to make sure that the plane is flying level. You can just look outside the cockpit window, look at the horizon, and know for sure that you are indeed flying level. No instruments needed. But how do you do it at night when it is completely dark outside and you can't see anything? How do you know if you're flying with wings level? The instrument that helps with that is the attitude indicator. It's a simple but ingenious device. It has a screen that is split into two. There's blue on the top, representing the sky, and brown at the bottom, representing the ground. And there's a small symbol in the center representing your airplane. When you're flying level, the aircraft symbol sits right on this line between the blue and the brown, called the artificial horizon. When your plane banks left or right, the symbol turns left or right. When you pitch up, you'll see more blue, and when you pitch down, you'll see more brown. Inside the attitude indicator is a small spinning gyroscope. Think of it like a spinning top that doesn't like being tilted, and it always stays in the same position. The attitude indicator uses the difference in position between the aircraft's body and the steady gyroscope to figure out which angle the plane is pointed at. So at a glance, looking at the attitude indicator, a pilot knows exactly what their aircraft is doing, even in total darkness. This instrument is so important that in the cockpit there is 3 of it. There's one for the captain, one for the first officer, and there's one here in the middle as a backup. Each one is independent. Each one is a lifeline. Tonight, only 2 of them will tell the truth. First Officer Virmani's attitude indicator is working perfectly. His screen shows the truth. The plane is banking left, dangerously left. Then Captain Cooker's voice cuts through the cockpit.
What's happened here? My instruments!
First Officer Virmani glances at his captain's gauge. It's frozen, stuck, showing a right bank that isn't happening. He looks down at his own indicator. Left bank, it's increasing. He needs to speak up. He needs to say something clear, definitive. Instead, what comes out is,
Mine is also toppled. Looks fine.
silence. What does that even mean? Has it toppled? Or is it fine? In the confusion, Captain Cooker hears what he wants to hear. Confirmation. My first officer sees it too. We are in a right bank and I need to correct it. Virmani watches the captain's hands move. His yoke turns further left. His own attitude indicator screams the truth. 10 degrees left bank. 20 degrees. 30 degrees. He sees it. He knows what's happening. But he doesn't reach for the controls. He doesn't say, I have control. He doesn't challenge his captain. This is 1978. In this cockpit, in this culture, first officers don't contradict captains. You trust your commander. You follow orders and you stay in your lane. So First Officer Virmani stays silent. And the plane keeps turning. Flight engineer Alfred Faria sits behind the pilots, facing sideways. From his position, he can see everything. He sees the captain's indicator stuck at 15 degrees right bank. He sees the first officer's indicator working, showing a 30-degree left bank. The backup indicator in the center console is also working, also showing a 30 degrees left bank. The captain is following the incorrect gauge. The bank angle is increasing, 35 degrees, 40 degrees, and they are at 2,000 feet and falling. He has to stop this now.
Don't go by that one. Don't go by that one.
Which one though? Don't go by the captain's indicator, or don't go by the first officer's indicator, or don't go by the backup. 10 seconds ago, the first officer said his instrument had toppled but was fine. Now the flight engineer is shouting, that one. 2 crew members, 2 warnings, 0 clarity. Captain Cooker has no idea which instrument to trust anymore. And by the time Faria's words leave his mouth, the plane has already crossed 40 degrees. They are already falling, and it's already too late. 50 degrees left, 60 degrees left. The plane is now past its design limits. The bank continues. The plane exceeds 100 degrees of bank. The 747 is now nearly inverted, flying almost upside down. The nose drops 10 degrees down, 20, 35. The airspeed increases as gravity takes over. The altimeter spins down 1,500 feet, 1,000 feet. The crew can now hear chaos in the cabin. Passengers are experiencing significant G-forces. They are only held on by their seatbelts. Screams fill the air. In the cockpit, alarms begin screaming. Every warning system that the plane has is now yelling at the pilots. The first officer finally speaks up. Level it! Level it! But it's way too late. In the final few seconds, the captain tries to recover the plane. He tries to roll the wings towards level. He pulls back on the controls desperately. But there is no time. There is no altitude. The ocean is just 5 seconds away. At 8:13 p.m., exactly 100 seconds after leaving the runway, Emperor Ashoka impacts the Arabian Sea, less than 3 kilometers off the coast of Bandra. All 213 people are killed instantly. The magnificent plane disintegrates. This isn't just any plane. 7 years earlier, this aircraft landed at Bombay's airport to much fanfare and celebration. This was Air India's first Boeing 747. It was India's entry into the elite club of nations operating the Queen of the Skies. They named it after one of India's greatest emperors, Emperor Ashoka. And Air India went all out. They branded it Your Palace in the Sky. You know those famous arches on the windows of every single Air India plane we see these days? This plane was the first one to get that. The upper deck was converted into the Maharaja Lounge, featuring rich tapestries, luxurious bars, and seasonal menus inspired by Indian culture. This was a flying palace, built to showcase Indian heritage on the world stage. In 1978, Air India was at its peak. It was a premium carrier, competing with Pan Am and British Airways as one of the world's finest airlines. And Emperor Ashoka was the crown jewel of their fleet. And that makes what happened to this plane even more devastating. The Air India fleet lost its king. Search and rescue teams soon reached the crash site. They unfortunately find no survivors. The cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder are soon recovered. Indian investigators soon identify the malfunctioning attitude indicator as the primary reason for the crash of Air India 855. But Boeing, the airplane manufacturer, disagreed. Boeing argued that the sole reason for the crash was Captain Cooker himself. Captain Cooker had previously, in 1975, been grounded for 6 months due to his uncontrolled diabetes and excessive use of alcohol. Boeing argued that with these conditions, Cooker should never have been allowed to pilot the plane in the first place. And it was a combination of the medication and the alcohol that caused his spatial disorientation. This wasn't the last time this would happen though. 11 months later, in November 1978, a British Airways 747 departs Zurich Airport headed for London. Captain Fred Insole is at the controls. The aircraft departs into the night. And moments after takeoff, Captain Insole's attitude indicator freezes. It stops moving. The exact same failure. But this time, something different happens. Captain Insole immediately recognizes the problem, and without hesitation, he transfers control to his first officer, whose attitude indicator is working perfectly. The plane continues climbing normally, and they land in London without incident. But that won't be the case on December 22nd, 1999. A Korean air cargo Boeing 747 departs from London Stansted Airport at night. Again, the captain's attitude indicator malfunctions. It freezes, showing incorrect roll data, just like in the Air India flight. The first officer's indicator works correctly, and the flight engineer calls out a warning, bank angle, bank angle. But in this case, the captain doesn't respond to the calls. He keeps banking further left, just like what Captain Kakkar did. He kept following his faulty instrument, and 55 seconds after takeoff, that 747 crashes, and all 4 crew members are killed. The parallels are chilling. The same aircraft type, the same instrument failure, on 3 separate instances with 3 separate airlines. 213 families were lost to the Arabian Sea that night, and 213 families will spend the rest of their lives wondering, what if the flight engineer had spoken up just a little earlier? What if the captain had looked at the backup indicator? What if the first officer had said those words, "I have control," and taken over the plane? January 1st will never be a celebration for those 213 families ever again. Don't forget to click the link in the description to grab the special CyberGhost VPN discount. It keeps your data safe while you browse and unblocks all blocked content online. All for just $2 a month. It's completely risk-free, so check it out today. Indian Airlines 605 is on final approach to Bangalore.
India 605 clear to land.
Everything looks normal. The weather is clear, the runway is in sight. But just then, something changes inside the cockpit. The engines move to idle. The aircraft begins sinking and the speed begins dropping. But neither pilot notices.
400.
The plane is falling fast, the runway is still a mile away, and at this rate, they won't make it. But there is silence in the cockpit.
300.
They are too low, too slow, too far. Still nothing.
200.
At 136 feet above the ground, just 4 seconds from impact, Captain Fernandez's eyes go wide. They are about to crash.
Hey, we're going down.
He yanks the stick back, full power, toga thrust. The engines begin to spool. Will the engines spool in time? Can the pilots pull up before hitting the ground? What really happened inside this cockpit? This is the story of Indian Airlines Flight 605. It's 10:58 in the morning at Bombay's Santa Cruz Airport. Indian Airlines Flight 605, an Airbus A320, is preparing for departure to Bangalore. Victor Tango Echo Papa November is just a baby. She's just 5 months old. She's the 79th Airbus A320 ever built, and she's one of the newest aircraft in the Indian Airlines fleet. Due to congestion over Bombay, our flight to Bangalore this morning is running 1 hour late. At 11:30 am, 139 passengers board the aircraft, along with 5 cabin crew and 2 pilots. Among the passengers are Ashok Vardhan Birla, traveling with his wife Sunanda Birla and their daughter Sujata, 3 members of one of India's most prominent industrial families, heading home to Bangalore to celebrate Valentine's Day. Up ahead in the cockpit, 2 experienced captains are about to face a test that neither of them expected. In the left seat is Captain Cyril Fernandez. He is 46 years old with nearly 10,000 hours in the air. But on the A320, he just has 68 hours. This is his first route check on the type. He's being evaluated to see whether he can captain flights into Bangalore. And performing that check this morning is the man sitting next to him, Captain Satish Gopujkar. He's 44 with 10,000 hours total and 255 hours on the A320. He is one of India's most experienced A320 pilots. He'll be deciding whether Captain Fernandez passes or fails today's test. This is Bangalore's HAL airport. Not the current Kempegowda airport which serves the city, which is technically in Bangalore the same way the moon is technically visible from Earth. HAL airport is the old airport, right in the heart of the city. HAL airport sits on a plateau around 2,900 feet above sea level, and it is surrounded by dense urban development. It has a single runway, 0927, which is around 3 kilometers long. On the approach on the 09 side of the runway sits office buildings, hospitals, and the Karnataka Golf Club, less than half a mile from the runway threshold. Between the golf club and the threshold is a major road called Wind Tunnel Road, followed by the airport's perimeter wall. Pilots approaching this runway need to be extremely precise with their glide slope, as they need to clear all these obstacles and hit the runway just 1,000 feet after the wall. And to add to this complexity, these runways don't have an ILS. There's not much margin for error here. The A320 is unlike any airplane that either pilot has flown before. This airplane uses a new technology called fly-by-wire. Unlike older airplanes, there are no cables connecting the side stick to the flight control surfaces. When the pilots move the stick, they send a request to a computer which then decides what to do. Same thing with the throttles. When the throttles move, it doesn't directly control the engines. The throttles send a command to another computer which then determines how much thrust is safe to apply. This was the Tesla of the skies in 1990. The A320 is designed this way to reduce pilot workload. It is designed to prevent pilots from exceeding the aircraft's limits. If the pilot makes a mistake, the computer will step in and correct it automatically. The computer won't let you overspeed. The computer won't let the plane stall. The computer won't let you crash. In theory. At 11:45 am, boarding is complete and the plane pushes back onto the taxiway. They are cleared for departure, and at 11:50 in the morning, Flight 605 departs Bombay, headed for Bangalore. The route takes them southeast from Bombay, over the Western Ghats, and then on to the Garden City. It's a routine 400-kilometer flight.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain.
By
speaking.
12:25 p.m., 30 minutes into the flight, the plane is cruising at 33,000 feet. Flight 605 enters the Madras Flight Information Region, and they begin their descent towards Bangalore. Their estimated arrival time is 1:04 in the afternoon. The current active runway at Bangalore is runway 09. Inside the cockpit, the pilots are performing everything by the book. By 12:53 p.m., the plane is now 42 nautical miles away from the airport, and Bangalore ATC clears them for a visual approach. The weather is clear enough that they can fly by sight rather than by instruments, so they accept. The aircraft descends below 6,000 feet, and by 1 p.m., they are now just 7 miles away from the runway. They are handed over from approach control to tower control.
Bangalore Tower, India 605, good morning. India 605, good morning, report short finals. Roger, India 605.
Captain Fernandez is the pilot flying. Captain Gopuchkar is the pilot monitoring. Captain Fernandez disconnects the autopilot. He'll fly the plane manually from here on out. But to guide him with the glide slope, he leaves the flight directors on. The flight directors are these crosshairs on the pilot's displays. Each pilot has their own independent flight director, FD1 for the captain, FD2 for the co-pilot, and each one can be turned on or off independently. This will soon become important for this story. It's 1:02 p.m. The plane is now on short final. The gear is down, the flaps are set, and the runway is in sight. However, given he's flying manually, Captain Fernandez has not descended far enough, and they are now slightly higher on the glide path. But that's not unusual for a visual approach, and it is easily correctable. Captain Fernandez asks Captain Kopuchkar to select a 1,000 feet per minute descent. This will accelerate their descent and bring them back to the correct glide slope profile. Gopuchkar turns the vertical speed knob, and the aircraft begins descending at 1,000 feet per minute. Within a few seconds, the plane intercepts the actual glide slope. They now need to maintain 700 feet per minute to stay on the glide slope.
Okay, 700 feet per minute descent, please.
The sound of a knob turning is heard on the cockpit voice recorder. Within seconds, things that should not happen begin to happen. The auto thrust changes state automatically. The speed mode disengages. The throttles retard to idle. This is the point at which everything changes. So to understand what's going on, you need to understand how the auto thrust system works in an Airbus A320. The auto thrust system has multiple modes, but the two modes that are of interest to us today are the speed mode and the open descent mode. The speed mode is like the cruise control in your car. You set a speed and the auto thrust will adjust the engine's power automatically to maintain that speed. This is the mode that you want to be in during final approach. The other mode is open descent. This is similar to placing your car in neutral whilst going downhill. The engine will provide no power and the only way to control speed is by feathering your brakes. Similarly, in open descent, the auto thrust will place the engine in idle thrust. The computer no longer manages the speed. It is up to the pilot to manage the speed by controlling the plane's pitch. The flight's computer automatically switches between these modes depending on what the pilot is doing. When the pilot selects a target altitude lower than the current altitude, the computer assumes that they want to descend as efficiently as possible. So the flight computer automatically switches the plane to open descent and it lets gravity do the job. All of this works perfectly until it doesn't. To get the plane to stay on the glide slope, Captain Fernandez has asked Captain Gopuchkar to set a vertical speed of 700 feet per minute. The flight control unit has two knobs that sit side by side. The one on the right controls the vertical speed and the one on the left controls the altitude. They are the same size and they have the same feel. Have you ever, in a new car, flicked the windscreen wiper instead of the indicator? The same thing happens here. Captain Gopuchkar reaches for the knobs and instead of setting the vertical speed of 700 feet per minute, sets a target altitude of 700 feet. Bangalore's runway sits at 2,872 feet above sea level. An altitude of 700 feet is below ground level. The moment that number was entered, the flight computer recognizes a descent command and the auto thrust switches to an open descent mode. The throttles move to idle. The engines retard to idle thrust. The plane begins falling towards the earth. From this moment on, the pilots have 35 seconds to save this plane. There is no alarm, there is no warning, there is no indication that anything is wrong. The aircraft is doing exactly what the pilots have asked it to do. So the problem is invisible. But it won't stay that way for long. Captain Fernandez is following the flight director commands. But without thrust from the engines, the plane begins sinking fast. Fernandez notices that they are dropping below the glide path. So he pulls back on the side stick. The nose rises. When you pull back without power, the angle of attack increases and the drag increases. And so, the airspeed begins to decay further. 132 knots, 130 knots. Captain Fernandez expects the auto thrust to automatically adjust the power to maintain his speed. But remember, that's not working. Captain Fernandez is flying a visual approach, so his eyes are locked out of the window trying to get the plane to land at a specific spot on the runway. It's the co-pilot's job to monitor the instruments and to call out when something looks wrong. And on the primary flight display of the co-pilot, in bold letters are the words open descent and idle highlighted in green. This should have jumped out to the co-pilot if he had seen it, as the plane should not be in this mode during landing. Also, it's the co-pilot's job to monitor the airspeed of the plane. It's dropping significantly, but he makes no mention of it. There is no communication between either pilot.
400.
The plane is 400 feet off the ground. The runway is 6,000 feet away. They won't make it unless they correct immediately. They still don't realize that something is wrong. 3 seconds pass. No reaction.
300 feet.
Gopuchkar hears the call out. He looks outside. From experience, the angle that he sees doesn't look right. It looks like they are too low, too far from the runway. So he checks his instruments. And there it is. Idle in green, open descent. The plane is in the wrong mode.
You're descending on idle open descent all this time.
Both the pilots have now realized that the approach is unstable. The engines are at idle and the plane is sinking fast. There is only one action that can save them, which is to push the throttles forward and go around. But they don't do it. The two pilots begin troubleshooting instead. Captain Fernandez remembers his training. The flight directors control the auto thrust mode. If he turns them off, the auto thrust should exit open descent and return to speed mode, and the throttles should advance. So, he switches off his flight director. There, crisis solved, the throttle should advance and they should be able to land. Right? But the throttles don't advance. Fernandez has only turned off his own flight director. Gopuchkar's flight director is still on. As long as one flight director remains active, the mode won't revert. The throttles stay at idle. 200 feet above the ground, the plane is still descending. The sounds of switches clicking, the sounds of knobs turning.
You're on the autopilot still? No, it's off.
Still troubleshooting, still trying to understand. 136 feet above the ground. Panic sets in. They are fighting the automation and the automation is fighting back. The ground is rising fast. Captain Fernandez looks outside. The runway is still far away. The ground is rushing up.
Hey, we're going down. Oh shit.
100. Fernandez pulls the side stick full aft. The nose rises sharply. The angle of attack increases. The plane is on the edge of a stall. The plane's last safety feature activates, Alpha Flow Protection. It is designed to prevent stalls. If the computer thinks the plane is going to stall, it will override the open descent and it will command maximum thrust from the engines. The engines spool up. 50. For a moment, it looks like the system might save them. The power is rising. But turbofan engines take around 8 seconds to spool up to full power. These guys only have 4.
Captain, we're still going down. Go around.
10. They call for a go around and push the throttles to go around thrust. But it's too little, too late. At 1:03 p.m. and 17 seconds, Indian Airlines Flight 605 crashes into the grass surface of the Karnataka Golf Club at a speed of 108 knots, just 2,300 feet from the threshold of runway 09. A fire begins immediately. Flames spread across the fuselage, and within seconds, the fire reaches the cabin. At HAL Airport, the ATC sounds the alarm. Fire engines scramble to save the passengers and the crew. They immediately drive to the perimeter gate to reach the crash site. But the gate is locked. No one has the key. It takes several minutes to find the key, unlock the gate, and reach the wreckage. By the time the first fire truck arrives at the scene, the forward and center sections are fully engulfed. Firefighters battle the blaze for 2 hours. A witness on the ground saw the 2 pilots through the cockpit window. Both the pilots, alive, were struggling with the overhead escape hatch. The smoke thickens and then flames. They could not escape. Of the 146 souls on board, 92 people, including the 2 pilots, do not survive. 81 of the 92 people died from burn injuries, not from the impact itself. The crash was survivable. The fire was not. See this building here? This building wasn't there in 1990. I have recreated the flight path from the investigation data, and if this crash had happened just 10 years later, Flight 605 would have hit this building and not the golf course. The death toll wouldn't have been 92, it would have been hundreds. The investigation was led by Justice K. Shivashankar of the Karnataka High Court. The conclusion is unambiguous. Pilot error. The crew could see idle on their displays, and they could hear the altitude callouts. They knew that the runway was far away, but they did not advance the throttles. Had Gopuchkar turned the correct knob when Fernandez asked for 700 feet descent, this would have been a normal landing and everyone survives. If Fernandez had turned off both flight directors, the throttles would have advanced, the plane would have gone around, and everyone survives. If either pilot had manually advanced the throttles at 400 feet, the engine spools up, the aircraft climbs, and everyone survives. 3 paths to survival, but in this actual timeline, none were taken. The investigators concluded that if the pilots had applied full power just 2 seconds earlier, the aircraft would have cleared the golf course. 2 seconds. But the Indian Commercial Pilots Association rejected the official report. They argued that the crash was not pilot error, that it was a design flaw. They argued that the knobs were too similar and the auto thrust system was too complex. Less than 2 years later, another A320 crashed under eerily similar circumstances. Air Inter 148 descended into the Vosges Mountains in France, killing 87 people. The captain had accidentally entered vertical speed instead of flight path angle. Same display window, different modes. The error went unnoticed until too late. After that incident, Airbus redesigned the flight control unit. The altitude knob and the vertical speed knob were moved further apart. The displays were made more distinct. Additional warnings were added to alert the pilots when the aircraft enters open descent mode during approach. But these changes came too late for Flight 605.